Ladies and gentlemen, can I please have your attention? I've just been handed an urgent and horrifying news story.
Second thing we are keeping an eye on tonight is the reaction, particularly the reaction on the political right, to the long-awaited Durham report. What? The long-awaited what? Well, the reason we're watching for the right and their reaction to this is because the Durham report is only really long-awaited by them, and they really, really have been awaiting this report. Politico reports tonight that U.S. investigators, including the FBI, are looking into a Russian citizen in conjunction with one of the incidents on the Trump campaign last year, which defied explanation at the time. Here on this show, really since the summer of 2016, we have covered the Russia angle on the candidacy and then the administration of the current president probably more than anybody else in the national press, and I will admit that. The Russian military intelligence unit that carried out the DNC hack, that group is nicknamed Fancy Bear, and they're apparently still working now, this summer, still against us, the American public, still on behalf of Donald Trump's interests. Right after we learned last month about the Trump Tower meeting between Donald Trump's eldest son, Donald Trump Jr., and his campaign chair, Paul Manafort, and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, along with all those various Russians who were promising Russian government dirt on Hillary Clinton, they did decide to get up on their hind legs and fight and intercede aggressively for one specific thing in the platform, one specific part of the Republican Party platform, and that was a thing about Russia.
But wait, there's more.
Putin, Russia hates Russia, Putin, Russia, Moscow, Russia, pro-Russian, the Russians, Moscow, Russia, Putin, Russia against us, the Russians rush against the U.S., the Russians, Russian government scheme, the Russians, Vladimir Putin, Russia, Putin and Russia, Moscow, Russia, the Russians, Putin, Russia, the Soviet Empire, the second of the 20th century's great evils, communism, communism, Russia, assault by Russia,
Putin despises the West in general and the United States in particular, the Soviet Empire. Russia. They're the adversary. They want to bring us down, the Soviet Union.
Did you just have a brain fart?
You're awake, by the way. You're not having a terrible, terrible dream. Also, you're not dead and you haven't gone to hell. Russia, Moscow, Russia, pro-Russian, the Russians, Moscow, Russia, Putin, Russia against us, Russians.